Sir Burns, we can start now.
Yeah, I'm ready. Hi everyone, welcome to our this afternoon webinar series on SDG, Shaping Up Peace Together, a week devoted for SDGs. Friends, scouts and scouters, welcome. Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you for watching the Facebook Live. Thank you for being on the Zoom. For today, we will have SDG 13, 14, and 15. Kate? Kate, let's have our webinar rules.
Mute your microphone. To help keep background noise to a minimum, make sure you mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Be mindful of background noise. When your microphone is not muted, avoid activities that would create additional noise. Position your camera properly. If you choose to use a web camera, be sure it is in a stable position and focus at eye level if possible. Doing so helps create a more direct sense of engagement with other participants. Limit distractions. You can make it easier to focus on the meeting by turning off notifications, closing or minimizing running apps, and muting your smartphones. Avoid multitasking. You retain the discussion better if you refrain from replying to emails or text messages during the meeting and wait to work on that PowerPoint presentation until after the meeting ends. If you have questions, use the chat box. Goal number 13, climate change. Our speaker for this afternoon has been an environmental education officer for the Worldwide Fund Philippines since 2008. She is a big fan of nature and a strong believer of the power of education. WWF Philippines' mission is to stop and eventually reverse the accelerating degradation of the Philippine environment, to build a future where Filipinos live in harmony with nature. WWF Philippines acknowledged the vital role of education in mainstreaming programs that address diverse environmental issues. WWF Environment Education Program provides one platform to elevate awareness and enrich youth's educational experience as we move towards a sustainable nation. The environmental education program has reached more than 1 million individuals today, including students, teachers, and members of the community. Friends, guests, Scouts and Scouters, let's all welcome Mile Padilla.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I may just allow me to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Oops, sorry. There. All right. So I guess. So again, I'm May Padilla, and I'm from WWF Philippines. Has anybody here heard of WWF before? Are you familiar with WWF? So WWF actually stands for Worldwide Fund for Nature. And so just to help you remember better and to make it more fun, I'd like to teach you also the sign language for WWF. So we'll start with forming two W's with your fingers like this. Can you see me? If you can see me, there. So because the world is round, let's do one big circle like this. World wide fund for nature. All right. Let me see. Let me change my view so that I could see those in the room. Okay. So again, can you repeat after me? We'll form two W's. World wide fund
Fun.
for nature. All right. So that's WWF. Now, before we start, if you can go to Mentimeter. Let's try if this will work. So either you can scan the QR code or you can type in this link, or you can go to menti.com and then key in 3162056. So there will be a question there saying, what comes to mind when you hear or see the word nature? So someone has already entered one word, biodiversity. Tree, calm. Maybe I'll give you 15 more seconds for those who are still typing in their answers. So far we have 4. Blessings. God's gift. Essential. So we'll do the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So this is actually very different from the answers that we usually get. So it's very it's nice to see that that's what you think when you see or hear the word nature, because usually when we ask this and when we go to schools and when we ask this, okay, wait. What we usually get are these answers or these images. They remember trees, mountains, clouds, different animals, from wild animals to insects to they also think about our oceans, animals in the ocean. But I guess what's very important to note is that we are also part of nature. So that's one of the things that we want you to remember always, that people, you and me, we're all part of nature. So just a bit of a background. WWF used to be World Wildlife Fund. So when it was founded in 1960s, that was the name, because the original goal of WWF was to protect species, no, endangered and critical species. But the founders realized that if you wanted to take care of these species, that also meant taking care of their habitats. And taking care of their habitats also meant dealing with issues like energy source, waste management, and climate change. So now our name reflects the greater mandate. We're present in different countries all over the world. And in the Philippines, we also have different projects in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So I'm from the Philippines, and our projects are mostly centered along these themes: food security, water management, wildlife conservation, and climate adaptation. But our ultimate goals would fall under these two tenets. We want to conserve biodiversity and reduce the human footprint. So when it comes to reducing the human footprint, um, climate change will always be included. The issue on climate change will always be included. So this is a quote from Obama saying that no challenge poses a greater threat to future generations, to your generation, than climate change. So for this afternoon, I'd like to talk more about climate change. I know you guys are already familiar with climate change, but I guess we can do a review. And I'd like to stress three important points. So the first point is that the climate is changing. It's already happening. The climate change is already happening. So we can do a quick review. I'm sure you guys are familiar with weather. So we usually say that weather is the condition of the atmosphere at a particular place at a particular time, and it can change very rapidly. So um, every day we can have a different weather condition. If you can see the sample chart on the side, so it can be different every day. But because weather changes very rapidly, it can also change within the day in a matter of hours. We can have a different weather condition. So in the morning, it can be very rainy, and then it can be very hot and sunny in the afternoon. And then before the day ends, we can experience rain again. So that's weather. And weather is determined by these factors. Temperature, these are the things that we look at when we talk about weather. Wind movement, wind direction, moisture, pressure, precipitation, humidity. Now, there's also climate, and climate is the average weather in a given area over a longer period of time. So, compared to weather, when you talk about climate, we're looking at a longer period of time, 30 years at least. So, in the Philippines, we have a tropical climate, and for us, that means having a wet season and a dry season. But for other countries, they have four seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. So some of the things that determine climate or affect climate would be where you are in the world, your location, how far or how near are you from the equation, your geographical features. So are you do you lie in a valley? Are you near the ocean? And then altitude, no, how your how high are you or how low, lowland, upland. So the climate can also change, and when it does, we call it climate change. So climate change is actually a natural phenomenon, but for climate to change, it will take a very 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 long time. So what we're experiencing now has become a problem. It's an issue, a threat, or even a crisis because the climate is changing faster than it should. So, you can do a quick review. Sorry, I don't know how to remove this annotation, but I hope you're not bothered by it. So, the sun gives heat and light to the earth, and we know that the earth absorbs and receives this, and the earth also reflects back some of this heat and light. Now, the earth is um, surrounded by the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is like a blanket made of gases. And some of the gases residing in the atmosphere are greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. And greenhouse gases are heat trapping gases. So this is our natural climate or greenhouse effect. So we need our greenhouse gases, now balanced number of greenhouse gases to keep the temperature at the optimum, and so that we can live comfortably and plants will grow, animals will survive. But what's happening now is because of human activities, especially activities that make use of electricity and gas. No, so we burn more fossil fuel that release more and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we also have activities that generate so much trash that release methane, for example. And when this happens, so we said a while ago that the atmosphere is like a blanket. So when we release more and more greenhouse gases, it's like putting on layers and layers of blanket. And how would you feel if you're covered with a thick blanket or thick layers of blanket? Of course, you'll feel very, very warm. No? So that's what's happening to the Earth. We're experiencing global warming, and the continuous increase in temperature is affecting our climate. So here's a comparison of our natural greenhouse gas and one that is anthropogenic or increased global warming caused by human activity. So this is a chart that shows top 10 hottest years on record since the thermometer was invented. So as you can see, the top 10 is in this century. So most of you have already experienced the warmest years in the planet. So when I started teaching in WWF, there were still some years, no, from the 1990s, but now all of them are 2000 and up. 2005 is the farthest, and the most recent is 2019, just last year. So we will find out next year, early next year, if 2020 will also be part of the 10 hottest years. But what this graph says is that this is already the pattern. No? Earth is getting warmer and warmer. So the first point, again, is that the climate is already changing. There's no denying. And the second point that we want to emphasize is that climate change changes everything. So we learned about the atmosphere. So everything under the atmosphere will be affected. One direct effect is extreme and unpredictable weather conditions. And this doesn't just mean, having your summer beach outing disrupted by heavy rains. It means having really, really strong typhoons and having them more frequently. So this is a footage of Typhoon Haiyan, or Yolanda as it is called in the Philippines. So it was so strong as you can see that it actually merited an entirely new category. So we now have super typhoons, and we're told that this will happen more frequently all over the world. So it was so strong that it caused different kinds of destruction. And extreme weather would also mean on the far end of on the other end of the extreme, on the other side of the extreme end, sorry, it can also mean lack of rain or having extended period of drought. And we've been seeing news now about the wildfires before in the Amazon, and then in Australia, and now in California. So every year they have wildfires, but because of climate change, the situation has been aggravated. Sea level rise is another effect of climate change, and I'll show you a
Other
clip
time-lapse shot of
from
Columbia.
Chasing
And
Ice.
everybody
So this
says,
is
well,
in
don't they advance
2012,
in the
8 years ago.
wintertime? No,
They
it
did the
was retreating
documentary.
through the winter
Tried
because
to,
it's an unhealthy glacier.
see how far the
We realized it was
ice would
retreating
retreat.
so far, we had to turn the camera upstream to follow the retreat.
And over the period of their research, they had to turn their camera several times because the ice had retreated that far.
Then we had to pivot it again. And then, when we went back this past August, it was so far out of frame, we had to turn the camera one more time so we could still see the glacier. So that's where we started 3 years ago, way out on the left. That's where we were a few months ago, last time we were into Colombia.
So a 2.5-mile retreat. Now the problem is that what happens in the Arctic or in other polar regions doesn't stay in the Arctic.
Picture a map of Florida with its long sandy beaches and wetlands,
so far away
or
from
cities
this
like
area,
New York,
only a-
Venice, and Alexandria,
because
all metropolises with some pretty watery boundaries.
These will eventually
Now,
have an effect
try to picture what these
on
might
us.
look like in 100 years.
For,
The Sunshine State might look very different than it does today. The same goes for Manhattan Island or Mumbai. This is our best guess of a warmer future, one where sea levels are gnawing away at the corners of our carefully drawn maps. Coastal cities are first in line for big changes, and some that can afford it are gearing up to spend billions to make sure they survive.
So another thing that we have to consider is that the effects of climate change are connected. No? It's like a domino effect. So, for example, whether there's too much rain or extended drought, our food supply can be affected. And crop destruction would mean more food waste. And more food waste would mean more methane. No? That would not be good for our climate crisis. Our water supply would also be affected. Health. So we're seeing cases of heat stroke, heat stress, and then um, respiratory our respiratory health is affected, and then there's also a rise in cases of vector-borne diseases, and we're also hearing cases of how climate change is affecting mental health. So we're dealing with depression and grief and the feeling of helplessness. So climate change is affecting not just our environment, right? It's affecting even our social structure. So especially if people have to evacuate, we would have more climate refugees, and it will also affect our different species, the survival of different species, and our ecosystems and different habitats. Now, the third point is this that while those seem very scary, no, or very uh, sad, very depressing, the good news is that we can still create a climate for change, especially with your help, no? Help of young people who are always ready to create change. So it's very important that we also focus on the on SDG 13, which is climate action. So it says here that the negative effects of climate change are already visible in so many aspects of life. Offsetting the impact of climate change starts with education, awareness, and individual action. We can all do something small to offset our footprint on this planet that we call home. So even our small actions can create a big change. So SDG 13 has actually 5 specific targets. So first is to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related disasters. So when we say resilience, the normal definition would be the ability to return to the original form after being bent, compressed, stretched, and it's also associated with elasticity. So usually one of the images that we think of when we say resilience is that of a rubber band, right? It's able to spring back even if it's stretched out. So it's also the ability to recover readily. But when you talk about climate resilience, it's the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazardous events or disturbances related to the climate. So it involves assessing how climate change will create new or alter current climate related risks and taking steps to better cope with these risks. So when we talk of climate solutions, we usually hear about mitigation and adaptation. So these go hand in hand. So when you talk about mitigation, these are actions to reduce emissions that cause climate change. So we're dealing with the causes of climate change. We try to find ways on how to lessen our carbon emissions. How do we lessen our methane emissions? And then when you talk about adaptation, these are actions that manage the risks of climate change impact. So we're dealing with the possible effects or impacts of climate change. We know that storms will come. So how do we prepare ourselves so that we won't be affected too much by those storms? We know that it can bring about different diseases or sicknesses. So how do we prepare ourselves so that we won't be affected by these threats? So it also involves DRR. So this is actually from the scout.org. So I guess you guys have already undergone different trainings on disaster risk reduction and immediate response. So another target is to integrate climate change measures into policies and planning. So we've been hearing about the Green New Deal. No? So we want our governments um, to really reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to but at the same time we also have to look at the social situation. We have to look at education and our health as well, and we also have to pay attention that human rights are always respected and valued. So for WWF, we also have what we call the New Deal for nature and for people. So the primary targets are zero loss of natural habitats, so and then zero human induced extinction, because we've seen uh, decline in our biodiversity, and to halve the footprint of production and consumption. Next is to build knowledge and capacity to meet climate change. So we must improve education, we must strengthen our efforts to raise awareness, and we must empower our educators and our learners so that everybody can have the chance um, to equip themselves and be prepared for climate change. The fourth target is implement the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, so UNFCC. So there are different recommendations. So recently we heard about the report, because originally we wanted to target 2 degrees, but now we've been told that we have to actually limit it to 1.5. We shouldn't go beyond 1.5 increase in temperature, because even just a half a degree can pose very devastating effects. Promote mechanisms to raise capacity for climate planning and management. Sorry, excuse me. So this means that everyone should be involved. So for young people or senior citizens should also be involved. Different sectors, um, women, youth, or um, indigenous community should also be consulted, because we have to also respect their wisdom in taking care of the planet. So these are the targets for SDG 13, climate action. But as an individual, no, as young people, there are also many things that we can do to help achieve these targets. So even in our homes, even in our small communities, even in our neighborhood, in our school, in our families. No? So there are actually some recommended to-do lists that we can try to pursue. So let's try to go over them quickly. So first in the climate action to-do list is learn about composting and set up a compost bin in your own household. So we know that for our compost bin, we need to include biodegradable. Usually, we include our food waste, dried leaves, dried twigs. There are different methods for composting. And then meat production industry is actually also a contributing factor. And it's good to be able to also explore more plant-based meals. So maybe when you have activities with your scouts, you can also think of vegetarian menus, or on your own. While we're still under quarantine, you can think of more ways to make eating vegetables exciting. So there's a movement called Meatless Monday. So we can start with that. No, one meal or one day at a time, we can try to opt for more veggies in our diet. Recycling is also very important. So when we talk of recycling, it usually involves a lot of big facilities and equipment. No, but as individuals, the biggest contribution that we can do is to segregate our trash. So when we segregate our trash, we're able to recycle more, and we are able to prevent trash from going to the landfill. Switch off your lights for Earth Hour, and maybe think of ways to celebrate outdoors. No, when we're allowed already to go outdoors. So we thank the Scouts for their support to Earth Hour. In the Philippines, we've always had the Scouts present during our Earth Hour switch off events, and we're very, very thankful. We really value your partnership. So, Earth Hour usually happens every third Saturday of March from 8:30 to 9:30. So we're asked to switch off our lights as a symbolic gesture of our commitment. But what's really more important is what we do when once we turn on the lights again. So after the 60th minute, how else can we really take care of the planet? What actual things can we do? How can we change our lifestyle to make it more sustainable? Number five, raise your voice in your community by writing letters to governments and corporations. So never underestimate your voice, and it's always good to make your stand known. So while maybe some of you, maybe most of you are still not at the voting age, but even then you can still make your voice heard. It's because you're still part of the community, you're part of the constituent, so it's also good to make your voice heard. Another thing that you can do is to also see climate change impacts from different perspectives. So perhaps maybe for you these are the certain effects or the certain impacts that you experience, but what about for other people, other members of our community? Number seven is we can participate in UNFCCC's climate pledge. I'll show you the form later. And then don't stop there. You can inspire at least five other scouts to also take the pledge. And then it's also very important that we make an assessment, so you can also calculate your carbon footprint. I can type in a link later for carbon footprint calculator that we use in WWF. Okay, so here, this is um, the pledge that I mentioned a while ago. So you can sign your digital signature. You can affix your digital signature if you agree to all of these. So those are 4 action points. Number 9, you can join United Nations campaign, Act Now campaign. So I actually downloaded the app, and it's very, very interesting because it provides a lot of materials that you can read. And then it also has an app for starting new habits, green habits, sustainable habits. And then you get points and you get a badge actually also for continuously doing all these habits. Number 10, learn about global climate change initiatives. So one popular one is the Paris Agreement, no, yung COP last 2015. So again, we have to also know about these things. So it's good that we know about the local situation, but it would also be a big step, no, to have a global perspective of solutions that are being um, proposed. Number 11, hold a discussion session with your group. So you can have a brainstorming session, even a virtual brainstorming session to discuss impacts of climate change and how you can also adapt, how you can lessen these impacts, or things that you can do also to mitigate your footprint or to lessen your footprint. So now the social media is a very powerful tool. So maybe aside from just posting your usual status or your usual photos, you can also utilize its power, in reaching out to more people. And then there's also the Earth Tribe, and this is one of the things that I mentioned earlier. So we're happy to have a partnership with the Scouts. So you can join the Earth Tribe. So there are different actions also um, mentioned there that you can do on your own or with your family or with your Scouts. So I can type in the link also so that you can learn more about it. And you can earn these 3 badges by fulfilling the different activities outlined there. So these are just 12 um, action points or plans that have been recommended, but you can also add more. For example, you can try planting trees. Um, it's this is very important. No, planting trees is very important because it's one direct way of minimizing our carbon emissions. So even if it's not yet a full grown tree, it's already able to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And then maybe you can also explore eco mobility solutions. So, if you can use your bike or you can walk if you're just going to nearby areas, but make sure to follow the safety protocols there. So I added 2 more. And then I'm sure you can think of other ways not to help the planet and to minimize our footprint so that we can create a climate of change instead of adding to the climate change crisis. So I'm actually down to my last 3 slides, sorry. So let's go back again to Menti. There's another question that I posed. So it's actually same link. If you lost it, you can go to menti.com and then type in this code. So the question now is, what personal pledge, sorry, there's a typo, can you add to the climate action to-do list? So we mentioned 12 and then I added 2 more, but maybe you can also think of other actions that you can do. Think of the things that you're doing now. Think of what activities do you think add to the climate crisis, and then what things can you do to also address that. So there we have our first entry: advocate clean energy. Are there other suggestions? So far we have 3. Zero plastic, yes. Because plastic is not just a problem in terms of waste management, but the production of plastic actually has actually a very high carbon footprint. So when you stop using plastic, you also decrease the emission of carbon dioxide. Conserve energy. Yes, always remember to switch off and unplug. Let's see the chat. Maybe some are answering in, yes. There are some answers in the chat. Let me just read them. Scout for SDGs, yes. Waste management, go green campaign, save animals, clean and green project. Okay, so there you can have a lot of you can think of a lot of ideas. No, so doesn't matter if you think that it's a small act, But if you do it always and you do it with other people, it will create a big change, a positive change for the environment. Okay, so you can continue adding to the Menti, but I'll proceed to my second to the last slide. So this is from Jane Goodall. I'd like to leave this quote say with you. Saving the planet from climate change is still possible, but we need to count on global action. Every one of us must make a difference. Otherwise, it will be too late. So if your video is on, can you raise your hand like this? And then reach out to the person beside you. Just stretch your arms to the edge of your box. And then pretend to tap the person behind you and say, the climate is already changing.
The climate is already changing.
And then tap them once again and say, it's now time to create change. So together, it's possible to still change the ending. So for my last slide, I will show this video. Oops.
To pose now shush. She makes the sound seems made to calm me down. She makes the sound seem needy. She makes the sound seem knee deep in the North Sea.
So again, thank you very much. I hope you were able to learn new things from the short talk. Again, thank you very much from WWF. Yay.
Thank you, Miss Mai, for doing the presentation. It's indeed really saving the planet from climate change is still possible, but we need to count on global action. Everyone must make a difference, otherwise it will be too late. I agree on this very strong message from your presentation. And friends, we can entertain at least 2 or 3 questions. If you have questions to our guests, you may unmute your mic, and then you may raise your hand so we can acknowledge you. And I think we have questions from the chat box. Yes, anyone who wants to ask questions to our guests, you can unmute your microphones.
Oh, if there are no questions right now, maybe they can just they can send a message through chat, and then
Yes.
I can answer them individually.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much, Ms. Mai, for doing this presentation, and hope this will be a start of some our big partnership with WWF with our Earth Thrive badge, and I know this will be a long time. We just started with the Earth Hours, and now we're having another project with WWF. Again, thank you so much, and have a good day and keep safe. Namas. Okay, guys. This afternoon we will have our next speaker, Erwin. Take it away. Erwin.
Life below water. Goal number 14. Our speaker for this afternoon is the Zero Waste Sustainable Food Campaigner at the Greenpeace Southeast Asia Philippines. She graduated with a degree in Bachelor of Science in Nursing. After practicing at the Treasury Regional Hospital, Marian worked in a research and development at Negros Women's for Tomorrow's Foundation. First as a research officer and then product development supervisor. At the NWTF, she managed projects and developed programs for environmental services, community development, poverty alleviation, and the financial inclusion of women. While her journey in environment work started as a Greenpeace volunteer in high school. It became her profession after moving from NWTF to join Greenpeace in 2018 as the assistant to the country director at the organization. She became the campaign coordinator for Climate Justice and Liberty campaign in 2019 and started working on the Zero Waste and Sustainable Food campaign this April. My friends, guests, scouts and scouters, let's all welcome Marian Ledesma.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Good afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you
That's great. Thanks, Rupert.
loud and clear.
It's great
Thank
to
you.
be here, and we're really honored to have been invited to talk about SDG 14, Life Below Water. And so I'll get straight to it. Allow me to share my presentation with you. Oh, wait, sorry. I hope everything can be seen clearly. Um, yes, so Life Below Water, SDG 14. I'm sure everybody has had an experience or a connection with the environment and particularly our oceans and seas. But what does it really mean to you? What does it mean to mankind and to our planet? So that's what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. But before we get started, allow me to share a video from our office in the UK.
We don't have audio, Marian.
Sorry?
We don't have the audio,
Oh,
please.
wait. Right, just give me a second.
I'm excited to see the penguins.
I want to see the otters.
I love the octopus. I'm excited to see the catfish. There should be millions of fish and 0% of plastic.
just showed you was a campaign video from our office in the UK. And it clearly shows something that is a reality here in the Asia Pacific. How most of our oceans and seas now, it isn't far into the future that we're going to be able to, that we are swimming in plastic. It's actually happening right now. And so, what can we do about it? This is why the UN came up with all of these sustainable development goals, particularly life below water, so that we can address the issue of the degradation of our seas, as well as the loss of a lot of our fish species. So, what is SDG 14? Life below water. Basically, it advocates for the conservation and the sustainable use of our oceans, seas, and other marine resources for sustainable development. And what we can see next, why is it so important that we talk about this? Well, healthy oceans and seas are essential to humankind. As I said earlier, it's also important to our climate and the planet that we live on. As a massive, complex, and immensely beautiful ecosystem, the world's bodies of waters provide food, jobs, energy, and water to us as a human race. And this actually affects a lot of people. So it affects over 3 billion people worldwide who depend on marine and coastal biodiversity, not just for their livelihood, but also as a primary source of protein for their food. And as of 2015, our marine and coastal resources and their related industries has been valued at $3 trillion a year. So that's 5% of our global GDP. And when you think about it, the oceans really is such an important resource, but it's also massive. So it covers 70% of the Earth's surface. And our seas and our oceans are vital in addressing the climate crisis as well, basically counterbalancing the effects of climate change. So how does that happen? They basically absorb carbon dioxide that's in our atmosphere and sequesters that greenhouse gas in the depths of the oceans. Um, and by doing so, it basically regulates the Earth's temperature. So, a recent study, actually by the University of Exeter, estimated that about half of the carbon dioxide that the world's emitting right now doesn't actually stay in our atmosphere. It is instead taken up by our oceans and land vegetation sinks. So, you can see how important our oceans really are to us. But um, now that we've recognized how important it is, the problem really is that a lot of our human activities are still impacting this important resource. For one, the UN estimates that about 40% of our oceans are heavily impacted by human activities. So the daily things that we do or our industries result in, these impact our oceans and seas. And if we're measuring the impact to a lesser degree, not considering like little small scale impacts as well, measuring that, that percentage of affected oceans and seas actually go up. Considering that marine litter can be found even in the deepest recesses of the ocean. Like a plastic bag was found by scientists last year at a depth of 10,000 meters or 36,000 feet in the Mariana Trench. And you can see how far reaching human activities, our consumption has gone towards our different ecosystem, particularly the oceans. And scientists have actually tried to measure our impacts in terms of plastic with scientific modeling, and it puts the number of plastic particles that are currently in our oceans at about 5 trillion. And when you think about it, really, it's quite scary. But at the same time, there can be something that can be done. And but it's not just plastic pollution alone that is sort of the culprit to the degradation of our seas. We're also looking at the fishing industry. So around 200 million people are directly or indirectly employed by the marine fisheries industry. Um, but at the same time, when you look at it, our world's fish stocks are actually overexploited. They're at this point where oceans can no longer sustainably produce the fish catch and seafood uh, to match our consumption. And much like other resources, basically we're just consuming too much too fast. And this overfishing has already been a problem, but at this rate and at this time, it's already to the point where it has become quite alarming. And then when you look at it, also another element of this problem that we have in our seas is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUUs. And basically, these are activities that ignore international and local laws meant to protect our marine resources and our environment. And there are often illegal practices that are involved, like dynamite fishing or bottom trawling when they're banned in some countries or locations. And when you look at IUUs, really, it's a $1 billion industry that provides the world with about 23 billion dollars worth of seafood. So it's a big problem that really needs to be addressed right away. And of course, there's climate change. So earlier you learned about that specific SDG that relates to climate action. Um, Here, climate is also quite important because it has such a huge impact on our oceans and seas and all our other bodies of water as well. So since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we've already seen a 26% rise in ocean acidification, and our ocean's pH is dropping at such a rate due to this absorbed carbon dioxide that I mentioned earlier. So it's not good for our habitats like our reefs. Our reefs have greatly reduced capacity because to repair and build their skeletons because of ocean acidification uh, that lessens or reduces the availability of calcium minerals in our water, so they can't sort of repair themselves and grow back after experiencing some stresses or trauma because of climate change. Aside from ocean acidification, there's also things that are affected. For example, there's also severe heat stress due to global warming, and that causes bleaching, making them more susceptible to diseases. Um, Pictured here are actually examples of coral bleaching in the Asia and the Pacific. And these have been documented by Greenpeace. First, you'll find the one from the Great Barrier Reef. Another one to the right is um, a coral bleaching event in Taiwan. And then to the lower right, you'll see um, the Maldives. So you'll see coral bleaching. It happens everywhere, and for the last one, this is right in my home country, the Philippines. This last one, the lower left one, it was actually taken by one of Greenpeace's partners at a marine protected area in my home province here in the PH. So I'm sure there are more than a few of you that have seen a beloved marine reserve impacted by climate change. But that's not all that climate change does to our oceans. So let me show you a graphic here from the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that really details everything that climate change does to our coral reef ecosystems. So for one, it warms our oceans. And as I mentioned earlier, this causes thermal stress, which results in coral bleaching and also the proliferation of a lot of infectious diseases in the sea. Then there's sea level rise. And the more that our sea level rises, the more sediments get into the water, and this causes smothering of corals. So the corals can't manage the rates of sediments going into the sea and impacting their habitats or ecosystems. And this prevents them from growing or weakens the corals. Another problem with climate change is that it changes storm patterns. So, as was mentioned earlier in the talk about climate change, we've actually seen stronger and more frequent storms in the past years. And this has resulted in physical damage to our reef structures. So I've seen more than one marine protected area or marine reserve being damaged or completely totaled by typhoons that have gone through our country. And it's a sad sight to see because you know that these coral reefs have taken decades just to develop, and to see them gone in a blink of an eye just because a really strong typhoon headed its way um, is really devastating. Another thing that climate change does is a change in our rain volume or our rain patterns. So we've seen increased runoff of fresh waters and in sediments, as well as land-based pollutants. So a lot of the polluting chemicals that usually stay in rivers or even on land are suddenly getting washed away into our oceans, and that creates a lot of algae blooms and also murky waters that reduce light, which is needed by some marine creatures to develop and grow. Another thing that it does is also altered ocean currents, and basically it just affects the food cycle in our oceans, changing connectivity and also temperature regimes. So a lot of our marine creatures are now experiencing a lot lack of food, and also there's a dispersal of larvae. And the last thing is ocean acidification, which I talked about just before that. So really, what's the solution now that we've seen how depressing, I guess, the state of our oceans is? Um, this is why the UN has come up with these targets to sort of help us overcome these problems and challenges and guide us on our way to address these issues. So I've grouped them according to the response they need. Some are more deeply connected to each other, and the actions they need to reach these targets are closely linked, you would say. So here you'll see SDG 14 targets related to conservation and protection, as well as those impacts for related to environmental destruction because of pollution. So one of the first targets is to reduce marine pollution, and um, to clearly state that target, it basically asks us to prevent and significantly reduce marine pollution of all kinds, specifically those that are stemming from land-based activities, and to lower that and to make sure that there's less plastics in our ocean, um, less waste that are being washed into our oceans as well. And the indicator that the UN has set to determine that is actually an index of floating plastic debris and the density of it in our oceans. Another target related to ecosystems and protecting them is the second one, to protect and restore ecosystems. And to do that, the UN actually aims to sustainably manage and protect our marine and coastal ecosystems so that we can avoid a lot of adverse impacts and also strengthen our community resilience and also the environment's resilience, as well as to take action for the restoration of all of these ecosystems. So it's not just about prevention and conservation. They also want to include things on rehabilitation and restoration of damaged areas. And how they would measure that target is actually the proportion of national exclusive economic zones that are using ecosystem-based approaches. So looking at how much or how big these economic zones are that use ecosystem-based approaches in comparison to the rest of your marine area in the country. Another one is conserving coastal and marine areas. And that just means that the goal is, or the indicator or the target is all about conserving at least 10% of the world's coastal and marine areas. And it should be sort of aligned with the national and international laws that we already have in place. um, and also informed by scientific information and knowledge that will guide us to making sure that what we're conserving stays protected, and making sure that we're doing it the right way. So, and the last one would be ocean acidification. So, the reduction of ocean acidification is a target all on its own, and it's all about minimizing the impacts of ocean acidification, and also addressing the roots of it. And that includes enhanced scientific cooperation at all levels, which is also a target on its own. And I'll talk about that later. So the next targets are all around fishing. And these four targets basically want to push for sustainable fishing and the reduction of overfishing, while at the same time presenting solutions. And that just means solutions in the form of support for small scale fishermen, and also small scale fishing communities. And it also means supporting or increasing economic benefits for sustainable fishing. So we want to make sure that small island developing nations and those developing countries are actually getting the right benefits by shifting to sustainable fishing and the sustainable use of their marine resources. And then in terms of small scale fishers now, um, why we want to do this, it's because legal, well regulated, and small scale fishing really is the ideal. It allows us to move away from large commercial or industrial fishing, which is responsible for a lot of environmental crimes like marine environment degradation and overfishing. It also impacts a lot of other sectors and other SDGs. For example, commercial and industrial fishing also has things like modern day slavery, um, as well as threats to small scale fisher folk and their families. So we want to make that shift to small scale fishing and sustainable fishing, so that these threats, harms, and risks that are associated with commercial and large scale industrial fishing are reduced to the point that um, our our fishing industry becomes more sustainable. And the last two targets are around scientific knowledge, basically scientific cooperation, and the enforcement and passage of international sea laws. And why do we want these two? So they're a bit more broad compared to the other ones. And this is because science and evidence-based um, programs are key to addressing a lot of our challenges and problems specific to SDG 14. It also wants to support marine technology that will help us overcome a lot of problems related to our oceans and seas. And then in terms of our policies, we really want to implement and enforce the international sea law, um, because this enhances the conservation and sustainable use of our marine resources, and also make sure that people and governments are held accountable for their actions in relation to our waters. So, what do all these targets mean? They might seem a little, I don't know, broad or far off from what you can do. And um, here we'll see some graphics that break it down and boil it to the things that we really need to address right away. So, one is to reduce and prevent pollution. So, we can protect our oceans by reduction and prevention of pollution, and also regulating the activities and the industries that produce these pollution. And another thing that we can do, or that we need to do immediately, is to start to responsibly manage and protect all of our marine life and marine ecosystems. And we can do that by sustainable management, and sustainable use of our marine resources, and also the establishment of things like marine reserves and marine protected areas. We also should stop overfishing and illegal or unregulated fishing. At the same time, we also have to support our fishing communities and small scale fishers. So um, it's not that we just completely stop the fishing industry, but we want to shift away from them and really focus on our fishing communities that provide us with food and then take care of our coastal ecosystems while they're at it. So we want them to learn and co-develop and practice more sustainable methods to catching fish and also harvesting seafood, so that we can continue to enjoy those benefits from the ocean. Another thing that we want to push for, it's actually images 5 and 6 in the presentation. So it's international law and scientific cooperation. These will help mitigate impacts on our oceans. And these approaches can also help us enhance conservation with better technology practices and also a better understanding of these ecosystems and how we can coexist with them. And then at the same time, they're also implementing sustainable use of ocean-based resources. But also, let's also not forget climate change. That's really something that we need to address. We need to work on climate change, its impacts, and also the roots of the climate crisis, so that we can fully achieve SDG 14. Those impacts that we saw before, so you see plastic pollution and coral bleaching, for example. Those are just some of the reasons why Greenpeace is advocating for a phase out of fossil fuels and plastic, which are big contributors to climate change and marine pollution. It might seem like a big undertaking when you're thinking of it from an individual perspective. But if we do it as a community and collaborate with different groups and different countries, we can really work on balancing the lowering of our consumption to sustainable levels, and at the same time shifting to alternatives through a just transition. So we can manage that shift away from polluting industries with baby steps in collaboration with our government and also the companies that we patronize. So examples of alternatives that we can go into, for example, are alternative transport and energy that doesn't rely on fossil fuels. Also looking at reusable items and refilling stations to replace plastic and packaging. So, but what can you do as young leaders and change makers, right? As individuals, I've seen a lot of great things on the Scouts for SDGs website. There's this list of to-dos that you can undertake to contribute to achieving SDG 14. And this provides you with some good ideas on how to go about it and even improve on it. So here you have holding a debate in your scout group. So do you need oceans, or do they need us? And I think that's a really great point to discuss. And hopefully you'll come to the realization that it's not about one needing the other, but it's really this relationship where it's mutually beneficial. And when you think about it, it really is that we need the oceans as much as they need our cooperation and our stewardship. Then there's also things like role playing exercises to understand the experience of climate change in island nations. And I think that's a really good step forward to really knowing what vulnerable communities are experiencing. Another to-do list is stopping the usage of plastic bags and straws. So all of these to-do lists are a great start for you as scouts. but you can actually build on these ideas to create your own projects and actions. So, for example, the third item here asks you to reduce your plastic use. You can build on this and start a program in your school, for example, to get more people to make the switch, or you can make it a policy in your school that people should be using reusable water bottles, lunch boxes, and cloth bags. So some of these you can try out in your school, or you can encourage your scout troop, for example, to take on this project and influence your community. Have local ordinances that support or encourage the use of these reusable products as an alternative to plastic. Another thing you can do is you can buy local, so you can directly support your small fisher folk, or even better, start a project that works to connect people directly to um, local fishermen in your community. So during the pandemic here in the Philippines, our local food producers really struggled with getting their catch or their products to consumers. So, what a lot of organizations and communities did, and that includes a lot of youth groups, they came up with ways to connect people in the cities to small fishers in outlying areas. So, their catch couldn't go to waste and they would still have a sustainable income during the pandemic. So, I remember several youth groups were actually coordinating directly with fisher folk and taking orders from their personal contacts and their networks in the environmental sector through social media and communication platforms, just to make sure that all of the catch from fishing communities were sold, and they help manage deliveries and everything. So that's just one way that you can connect consumers to your local fishermen and help them out and make sure that they have consistent flow of income while they're shifting to sustainable fishing. Another thing that you can do as young people is also to work with organizations, your schools, and your local government to raise awareness on overfishing, uh, IUU fishing, marine conservation, climate action, and marine litter. So, just getting out there, talking about the issues, making sure that the right knowledge is getting to people who are decision makers, and also people who have influence in your community is really a great start to achieving SDG 14. And what else can you do? Well, you can also engage your city and councils and advocate for single-use plastic bans that would limit production and the usage of plastic in your community or in your nation. So how do you do that? Basically, just contacting policymakers and legislators at different levels, from your city to your province or state, up to your national level, and then try to talk to them and get them to ban single-use plastic packaging and products. So there are actually a number of cities and countries in the Asia Pacific region with some form of plastic ban or another. So some of them ban bags, some of them ban plastic cutlery, others ban different types of plastic. And examples of these countries and cities are China, for example, has a plastic ban on bags, South Korea, Bangladesh, Taiwan, Australia. Also, cities and provinces here in the Philippines have it, like Quezon City and the province of Siquijor. So these are just examples of different levels of government um, really working on the plastic problem at its root and trying to stem the production of it. But of course, when you look at passing legislation or having a law, equally important to that law is enforcement. So as young leaders, another thing that you can take on, if for example your city or your country already has a plastics ban, is you can hold your government officials accountable and work with them to make sure that these great laws that are protecting our oceans are actually implemented and enforced. For example, you can do an information, education, and communication campaign on the plastic restrictions. You can share information about alternatives to plastic and helping people make that transition to a plastic free life by starting these programs. Another thing that you can do is to promote and advocate for a zero waste circular economy. And that just means that you should get in touch with your local mayors, um, or for example, your city council, and get them to implement zero waste approaches for waste management. And some of these are, for example, reuse, recycling, and composting. And you have to think that plastics aren't infinitely recyclable. So it really needs to be complemented with a ban on reduction and also working on reuse. At the same time, we also have to make sure that corporations take responsibility for their waste. It isn't enough that we as individuals are doing our part. We really have to make sure that those that are benefiting from plastic are also taking responsibility for the products that they're actively producing. And what else can corporations do? They can also look at shifting to alternative delivery systems. So ADS really just means refills and reuse. And we've seen these in zero waste stores. So phasing out single-use plastic and disposables is a must for a lot of companies. And what you can do is to support small to medium enterprises that have refill and reuse systems, and ask your favorite brands or companies to shift to them so that you don't have to deal with a lot more plastic packaging and also plastic waste. And another thing that you can also do is to start your own reuse revolution. You can partner with a local business in your community or companies that are present in your city, or in your region, and then start a project that could set up refilling stations and have policies that benefit people with reusable containers so that you can get food and other items without the plastic packaging. And then you can also work on these businesses to promote the use of reusable containers and create a network of shared containers for everyone's use. These are just some ideas that you could think of for your community. And we're down to the last two things that I wanted to share with you. So when you're preparing for your project or you're undertaking an action for SDG 14, what do you need to do? Um, First three things: knowledge, get knowledge on and an understanding of the issues that affect the SDG that you're working on. You'll also see as you study and learn about it that many of the same issues affect different sustainable development goals. And by understanding these connections, you can really take a step back and create projects or take action on a broader or systemic level and address different things at the same time with just one project. Another thing is data, data, data. So get the data that you need. Prepare your for your project with the right info on hand. Data-driven and evidence-based ideas really make for effective projects because you know what things are needed and what things need to be fixed prior to that. And the last thing is also related to data, research and other projects. So find out what worked before, what didn't work, what challenge were faced by projects that are similar to yours. Look into how they solved it or how they adapted it to their own communities. Also consider what resources they needed and who they partnered with. So the next step is basically when you have that idea already or when you have that design is to localize it or make it applicable and relatable. So whether you're working in a small community, in your city, or even on a national level, you have to make sure your project and the communication you're doing on the work has a local context. Make sure that the project is relatable to the people you're working with or to your target community, and make sure that you engage locals for a more realistic context of what you need to do. The next thing is to know relevant laws and policies. You really should know what policies or laws exist that tackle your specific project or SDG, and these laws that can support your action, for example. So you can also work with government leaders since they have their own action plans to do as officials. And you can examine if your project is complementing certain laws, for example, or certain government programs, and work with your local government to get things passed or get things done a little bit faster. And the last thing that you can do to prepare for your project is to identify stakeholders, key community leaders, and future partners. So make sure you have a good idea of who you need to work with, uh, who you want to motivate or to mobilize or engage during your project. Also, know who your stakeholders are. Uh, these stakeholders are important because they're either the ones that will be actors in your projects or their impacted communities, and their voice and their opinion is really important in the development of the project. You also should be identifying key movers and shakers that you would want to partner up with, whether it's a local government official or maybe a small business that is working in the target area. Um, and you also have to know the audiences that you want to communicate with, because you never know, the people hearing about your project could be your future project partners who want to eventually replicate or expand your action. So yeah, that's it for now. If you're in the Philippines, I invite you guys to know more a bit about our work at Greenpeace. You can head to act.gp slash better normal for our petition on a better normal after the pandemic and a just and green recovery. And you can also go for to act.gp slash youth agenda ph 2020. These are some of the we did this in collaboration with several youth groups here in the Philippines, and they came up with their agenda for a better normal and a just and green recovery. And they actually had it read out in Congress in the country. So maybe you can do something in your locality or in your country.
Thank you, Miss Ledesma, for that wonderful message and explanation about goal number 14. And then it's simply things that we should, as a scouts and as a responsible citizen, we should say no to single-use plastic. Okay. Now, if you have questions, scouters, if you have questions, we can take your questions now, about one or two questions, or you can ask it in the drop box, and then we can read it loud with to our speaker. You can unmute your microphone if you want to ask questions to our speaker. Okay. If none, again, thank you, Ms. Ledesma, for your time. Thank you for sharing your insight, and then thank you for partnering with us on our webinar this afternoon. Have a good day and keep safe. Thank you. Scouts and scouters, let's have us take a small break, and let's watch this video.
Introducing our very own online shop in the Asia Pacific, Scout Bazaar. More freebies and more discounts awaits you if you avail these promotional items. Purelytic solar bag good for your outdoor activity that provides safe and secure drinking water using nanotechnology. For Scout safety, wear our Scouts comfy mask whenever you're outdoor. Say no to single use of plastic, carry your own fofo cup. Make a difference. Did you know that plastic shopping bags cause thousands of waste that endangered nature? Shop in style with your Scouts 5-in-1 tote bag made of canvas together with its 4 organizing set to keep your goodies that reduce waste, can be reused and recycled. As Scouts, being the messenger of peace, get these souvenir items to remind us the importance of peace together with the other collector item badges from Asia Pacific. For every $20 purchase, you will get comfy mask or a Scout friendship mask off-white. Get more items to get more discounts. Visit us at scoutbazaar.com or visit our Facebook page at APR Scout Bazaar to get real-time feedback on your inquiries.
Go, Burns, go.
Yeah, Kate, the next video. Our next speaker is
Our next topic will be goal number 15, life on land. Friends, Scouts, Scouters, our guest speaker for this afternoon will be the Chief National Commissioner of the Boy Scouts of the Philippines, Officer in charge of the Boy Scouts of the Philippines Antique Council, Vice President for Academics, Philippine Public Safety College, retired Police Major General, Directorate for Human Resource and Doctrine, Philippine National Police, Chairman, Asia Pacific Region Program Subcommittee. Let's all welcome Attorney Cedric G. Trai.
Welcome, everyone. This is the last session for today's webinar series 2020 on Sustainable Development Goals on the occasion of the celebration of the International Day of Peace, initiated by the World Scout Bureau Asia Pacific Region Support Center. But of course, I would like to thank May Padilla and Ma'am Marian Ledesma for the enlightening sessions. Burns, can you later share the presentation? I would like to acknowledge the APR support, our regional director, for giving the opportunity to facilitate and share
So
Okay, let
Cedric,
us continue.
you're already
Yeah, but my presentation, who will be sharing the presentation sa team, technical team? All of us knew that SDGs are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. No? And these goals address the global challenges we are facing, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. And we all know that the 17 goals are interconnected. And in order to leave no one behind, it is important that we achieve them by 2030. This was developed from the Millennium Development Goals and the post 2015 Development Agenda by the United Nations. What we are presenting are readily available as reference sources and basic documents on the subject, on the issues that revolve around them. And you can see and obtain this from the UN platform on SDGs and Scouts for SDGs in the WOSOM service platform. Let us start with our review of SDG 15, Life on Land, and I would like to encourage you to share your experiences as if we have the time at the end of the session. Anyway, internet and the social media are filled with images, charts, infographics, and documentaries on sustainable development goals, particularly on life on land. Life on land is centered on sustainable management of forest, desertification, and land degradation, resulting in biodiversity loss. Its overarching theme is maintaining the integrity and utility of terrestrial ecosystems along the three major focus areas of first, forest, desertification, and biodiversity. So this Life on Land, yes, the thematic message revolves around protection, restoration, promotion of sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, and sustainable management of forests to combat desertification and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Next slide, please. This sort of review. So why does it matters? We know that forest covers nearly 31% of our planet's land area, and forests are home to more than 80% of all terrestrial species of animals, plants, and insects. 2 billion hectares of land on Earth are degraded, affecting about 3.2 billion people, driving species to extinction and intensifying climate change. Even the latest issue of the ecological threats register predicted that about 1.2 billion people could be displaced by the year 2050 by reason of ecological degradation. Next slide. And globally, 1/5 of the Earth's land area, or more than 2 billion hectares, are degraded. And it is undermining the well-being of some about 3.2 billion people. Yeah. Next slide. Anyway, this review, and later we can discuss practical things out of this subject matter. Of course, if we lost our forest, it means the disappearance of livelihoods in rural communities, diminished biodiversity, and the degradation of land. And we all know that almost always people in the rural areas and those in the marginalized sectors are affected heavily by biodiversity loss. Next slide. Anyway, all of the presentations are available for you. And how does it affect our health? No, increase demand for animal protein, give rise to intense and unsustainable farming, and increased use of and exploitation of wildlife, and the climate crisis are all driving the increased emergence of the zoonotic disease, meaning the diseases transmitted from wildlife to people, like what we are facing now. So there were a lot of outbreaks before that causes destruction to life, deaths, and the productivity lost among the livestock populations in the developing world. And in the last 2 decades alone, zoonotic diseases have caused economic losses of more than $100 billion, not including the cost of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is expected to reach about $9 trillion for the next few years. Next slide. There are a lot of things that we do. The Scouts for SDGs platform have enumerated a lot of things that we can do. Very simple, but very dramatic in our advocacy for life on land. Recycling, eating locally based or organic food, and preventing food wastage. Also, the conservation of our wildlife and the protection of rare and endangered species, and participating in ecotourism activities in our own communities. And it is very important that we involve ourselves and the communities in the development and management and of the integrated protected areas in our respective countries. Next slide. These are facts and figures that are readily available. We included these for your own for your information, but these are readily available in the platform, in the UN SDG platform, and in the Scouts for SDGs. And this presents a lot of data, statistics, and we cannot, well, we are overwhelmed by the magnitude of the issues at hand by just looking at the data. So these are the facts and figures on forest. We have already stated that about 1.6 billion people depend on forests for livelihood, and particularly the 70 million indigenous peoples. And we can relate to that because here in the Philippines, we have a lot of indigenous peoples who are living in the rural areas, in the hinterlands. And forests are home to more than 80% of all species of annual plants and insects. And from 2010 to 2015, in a period of 5 years, the world lost 3 million hectares of forest areas. And here it is mentioned significantly that poor rural women depend on common food resources and are especially affected by the depletion. And land degradation has reduced productivity in 20% of the global terrestrial area. And, you know, between $200 billion to about 500 billion in annual global output in crop production are put at risk as a result of the pollinator loss. Next slide. The other focus area of life on land is desertification. We have experienced a lot of drought and water stress, and that also accounts for the ecological threats mentioned by the report recently, along with population growth, food insecurity, droughts, and the rising temperatures, and that accounts for the desertification. So there is a loss of estimated at 30 to 35 times the historical rate due to drought and desertification. 12 million hectares are lost each year. The magnitude of losing about 23 hectares per minute. And 74% of the poor are directly affected by land degradation. Habitat loss, largely caused by human actions because of urbanization and development. A lot of our lands are converted into commercial and industrial areas. Next slide. And the other focus area in SDG 15 is biodiversity. We have seen a lot of trafficking of endangered species. It becomes a transnational crime already. Poaching. We have also have a lot of incidents of poaching. Here in the Philippines, we have the center of global marine biodiversity, and a lot of species are becoming endangered and becoming extinct. Of over about 80,000 tree species, less than 1% have been studied for potential use. That's very, very minimal. And of the 8,300 animal breeds known, 8% are extinct and 22% are at risk of extinction. So we are also in danger of becoming extinct if we do not do, if we cannot reverse the trend. Next slide. Now we all know that a lot of our diet is provided by the plants. No? For example, here almost every day we are a rice eating nation, and that provides us with the food requirement that our body needs. And about 80% of people living in rural areas rely on traditional plant-based medicines for healthcare. That's very valid. Microorganisms and invertebrates are key to ecosystem services, but their contribution are still poorly known and rarely acknowledged. So we need the research and development on this. And we need to really conserve and protect the integrated protected areas to not only the protection of the upstream, but also including the downstream to the coasts and to the sea. Next slide. These are the targets and indicators that are there in the SDGs. So conserve and restore terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. We have here the targets and the indicators there. and deforestation and restore degraded forests. A lot of countries are doing this now, and a lot of logging concessions have been stopped their operations in compliance with the standards established with the governments. Next slide. And governments are now strengthening their forest management agencies to conform with the standards. Here, and the certification restore degraded land. These are the targets and the indicators. Ensure conservation of mountain ecosystems. Even in the Philippines, we have strong advocacy on maintaining our mountains, and we have seen a lot of conversion to ecotourism activities instead of the logging activities. And those rural folks that are working in the logging or mining concessions before, they were trained to become tourist guides and forest rangers. Next slide. Protect biodiversity and natural habitats. So the indicators, we're looking at the Red List Index issued by the International Union on Conservation of Nature, IUCN Red List and the list, it includes endangered species. Promote access to genetic resources and fair sharing of the benefits. We have a lot of researchers coming to the country to look for medicinal components of the plant species, and we are giving access to these people for research, and of course we have to also to benefit from the results of those research as they develop the medicine from the plant species. But there is this highly regulated through the issuance, enactment of legislative statutes or administrative policies. Next slide. Then poaching and trafficking of protected species. We have been doing a lot of, our countries have been doing a lot of exchanges and collaboration on these transnational, because we are separated by our by borders, and trafficking comes comes from other countries, and being sold to in the market in the Philippines, for example. And we have been doing a lot of coordination for enforcement of laws against trafficking of protected species. Another target is prevent invasive alien species on land and water ecosystems. So we have experienced a lot of these in the country. The plants, for example, tree species that are not endemic to the country and devastated a lot of native species here. And another example are the fishes that are not native to this country, like snails, catfish, and now we can rarely see a native endemic species of snails and catfish in the country. Next slide. Integrate ecosystems and biodiversity in governmental planning, very important. Almost all our ministry or department of environment are giving this priority in the planning. And almost always there are laws in our countries that promote ecological or environmental protection and conservation. Increase financial resources to conserve and sustainably use ecosystems and diversity. This is about funding assistance or public expenditure that are dedicated to biodiversity conservation. Next slide. Then incentivize sustainable forest management. This being done through the community itself that are residing in the forest and then the hinterlands. And we have seen a lot of efforts on incentivizing for sustainable forest management. Combat global poaching and trafficking. We have discussed that a while ago, but it is on the transnational level. And for example, in this country, this one area, very important area in enforcement of laws in cooperation with other countries. For example, in the south of the Philippines, we have a lot of coordinated efforts and even exercises, simulation drills on and training on our campaign against illegal poaching and trafficking. Next slide. So, what is our tasks to promote our advocacy on SDG 15 to better understand the reality and the dynamics of this specific goal. We need to personalize the experience. What do I mean with this? We have to know and understand the goals, the targets and indicators, and to translate this into units of action. For example, there are a lot of simple things that we can do during the COVID pandemic. Very simple activities within the comforts of our homes and the immediate vicinity, for example, in water conservation, food conservation also, garbage and trash disposal, recycling, and a lot of other things. We need to situate the goal in our present state and look for ways and means to actualize it in the most simple and easy ways. As scouts, we can readily perform a lot of things by just looking at the my goal to-do list in the Scouts for SDGs platform. And these are very simple things, and you can add there what you're doing that are not in the list. It does not contribute to the goal achievement by just confining the issue to ourselves and to our minds. We have to start with ourselves as scouts, as young people, as leaders in our own right. We need to highlight the relevance of what we're doing by doing simple acts, but have great impacts. We have to also find out what our governments, our community, and civil society organizations are doing. Our facts and figures that were presented before tell us that only a third of more than 100 countries are on track in achieving the goals. So that's very short, a small number of countries that are achieving the goals. Our respective governments are in the forefront of the sustainable development, and I can say that SDGs are at the center or identified as priority area in the national development agenda of most of the countries in the Asia Pacific region. Most NSOs do not operate independently of the government, but rather performing governmental function, because most of NSOs are creation of law or they are attached to the agencies primarily responsible for the implementation of the SDGs. A majority of our NSOs in the Asia Pacific region are either an agency or adjunct to the education or youth ministry or department. Actually, by our NSO collaboration with the government and civil society organization, of course, by supporting the multi-sectoral efforts, and instead of doing this independently, strengthen the relevance of scouting as contributory to the social transformation and the national development. So we have to work hand in hand with what is already there in the country, in what the country or the governments are doing, and support it, so that we can have a powerful effort to really actualize the goal. And let us make SDGs as the unifying or the integrating factor in our relationship with the government and others, civil society organization. The WOSOM, through the Scouts for SDGs, has provided us with the clear guidance and general policies, but we need to align them with the realities in our NSOs and in our countries in achieving the goals. Just like talk about global options, local solutions. Next is to revisit or review the youth program, particularly in the implementation of the advancement scheme, the merit badge system. There is a need to integrate and make this compatible with the existing system in the NSO. It should be made clear that the activities and tasks suggested does not replace the existing program of the NSO, and this should not be considered an added burden to the activities already performed by our scouts to advance to the higher ranks. There is no intended disruption in the present merit badge system followed by its NSO. There is only a need to situate the goals in the merit badges pursued by our scouts for advancement. Take, for example, during the time of COVID, in the Philippines, we have a lot of problem. We are also facing challenges on how to advance our scouts to the next higher rank. And during the time of the pandemic, we have a project with the Department of Agriculture on on food security. So at the national level, we're trying to dispense with the traditional mode in the traditional merit badges required for each scout, and replace this with the merit badges that are pertinent to the scout agriculturist specialization. So at least during the time of pandemic, we can still have our scouts advance to the higher rank of Eagle Scouts by having the merit badges on food security and the scout agriculturist specialization badge. So then we have to look into the demonstrative or illustrative behaviors that would lead us to believe and conclude that the goal indicators or targets are realized. We are guided by a lot of examples in the field that attracts our senses and build our actions upon them. Take, for example, the concept of intergenerational responsibility, where young people of the present generation can take positive action in behalf of the succeeding generation for the protection of the environment. This doctrine of intergenerational responsibility was highlighted, no? When a group of minors in the Philippines, these are kids of school age, took action before the Supreme Court against a timber licensing agreement granted to a logging concession. And, they won, taking into the forefront the right of the future generation to a healthy and balanced ecology in accord with the rhythm and harmony of nature. And this includes the judicious management of forests and the exploration, utilization, development, and conservation of natural resources. The experience taught us a lesson that when young people, that even young people, our scouts, are responsible and active citizens, can take very simple acts like inquiring into the policies or decisions that are potentially harmful to the environment. And next is to practice, promote, and pursue. We have to act, we have to advance what we have started, and we have to continue. So this requires us to put into practice the projects and activities that we have identified in collaboration with community sectors. No? Because we want to have a collaborative and to improve and advance to the higher level, importance of what we're doing for life on land, and to continue what we have started until the goal is realized. And also, we have to share our experiences with the others, brothers and sister scouts, develop partnerships and linkages. We have to support, engage, cooperate, and assist and help in the initiatives of various groups and individuals in our own communities. And last is to, of course, give feedback in the form of self-assessment, reflection, review, report on what we have undertaken under this goal. Assess results and capitalize on whatever gains that we have achieved to guide us in our future activities and plans. Next slide. Oh, it's more or less practical. And as our reflection, the question that we want to answer is how do we want ourselves to be seen, heard, and felt in our advocacy for sustaining life on Earth? So protecting the Earth, we nurture the land, sustaining life, and of course, we preserve humanity. That's all. I think that's all. And that's a very short presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for being with us tonight and for your sharing this goal with us. And any questions? If you have questions before we wrap up the day.
Maybe they want to share. If you have time, they can still share the experience that they have.
Yes.
If they want to share the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. This is very.
Because all those.
Yes, sir.
It's okay. It's okay, Burns. It's your.
Yeah.
Your turn. I'm finished.
This is very strong reflection. Protecting the Earth nourishing land, sustaining life, and preserving humanity. This is very, very a strong reflection for us for today. Sir, Mr. Prasanna, if you're around.
Hi, thank you very much, Mr. Tryon. And I would also like to thank our two previous speakers, Miss Padilla, May Padilla, and Mariam.
Hey, Brother Prasanna, good afternoon. I don't know that you are present, so sorry, I was not able
Yes,
to.
sir. Thank you. I was listening, all of you, and you have a wonderful presentation. And I believe that with today's presentation directly connected to Scouts also, will definitely give a lot of ideas to our young people and our leaders who had been part of this today. And we will start making a difference starting tomorrow. So have a pledge. You all have been received a pledge cards. You have heard so many new ideas from all the two beautiful lady and a great handsome gentleman today. So I'm sure you guys are inspired. And 21st September, the International Day of Peace, you will have a pledge for yourself, which you will start following starting tomorrow itself and throughout the year, making a difference on this earth, below the earth, below the water, and wherever you can. Any one single act will help the change, the climate change. So thank you guys. Thank you everybody. And see you tomorrow, same time, same Zoom link, and we will be discussing something new. See you and bye-bye. Thank you, Burns.